So the first thing I'm going to say is if you have not incorporated full material declaration as a core element of your product compliance strategy, please consider doing so. If you don't have a substance database, you will always be behind 100%. There's just no way you can keep up. And if you are going to, start targeting full material declaration as a core element, then set those expectations to your suppliers up front. Let them know, hey, I expect FMD, so start working on this. Don't wait until the day you need it to ask them for it and find out they don't have it, but rather let them know as soon as you're ordering the parts, as soon as you're contracting with these suppliers that, hey, these are our requirements. So the suppliers can start working on that. And then make sure that your database is capable of aggregating data and reporting at the product, components, material, and more importantly, the article level, right? Because as we discussed, article declarations are important, and there's a lot of tools out there that simply cannot break a component apart into sub-articles. And so they can only report the concentration of the component itself, and they can't tell you, for example, that the brass pin in the inductor is the one that we're reporting against. And because of skip, that's not acceptable. So just make sure that when you're building your database, you're building it with a tool that can do this kind of calculations, right? And then if you're going to collect that kind of data from your suppliers and have that robust data available to you, make it available to your customers as well, if it's viable for your products. Obviously, if you produce servers the size of small rooms, you are producing refrigerators, you probably can't provide a full material declaration. Those are too complex. But if you're making optical modules, then you're going to want to provide those. If you're making a simple point mouse or a pointer device, then make those available to your customers. Why wouldn't you make that available, right? And ensure that your process allows for gaps in the FMD data like we've discussed. There's proprietary substances, legal declarations, and sometimes the supplier is unable to provide FMD. We're going to have a process in place to incorporate the data from those suppliers into our data set and still be able to show due diligence, right? And that's going to require that we have an ongoing communication process with our suppliers. This data must be refreshed and confirmed on an ongoing basis. We cannot receive it once and say, okay, I have the substance contents, I'm good. Because manufacturers have a tendency to change mixtures, change build locations, and these things will vary over time. So we want to make sure that we're confirming that our data is still valid over time. So now when we look at those incoming full material declaration files, how are we going to validate those? How do we do that? Well, here's some tips for validating the data once you receive them. First, evaluate them by comparing it to expected data. Compare it to similar parts from other suppliers, previous data, or industry knowledge, right? If I have 7 different suppliers of resistors, and one of them has a strange substance report, then I might go ahead and do further investigation on them, because when I compare them to what I was expecting to see in a resistor, I'm not seeing it. That kind of tribal knowledge is important to being able to bring that kind of validation, right? Those kind of common sense validation steps are just as important as the detailed ones. And then, as we discussed before, check it against the other documents you've received. Don't just collect the COCs, collect the FMDs, and put those in a vacuum. Compare them to each other. Ensure that every single piece of information you have on a part or material is consistent and tells the same story. If it doesn't, resolve that before you move forward. Review the reported articles against the FMD and ensure that your suppliers are calculating SVHC calculations per the once in article requirements. A lot of them are not. So just make sure that they are. If they aren't, you can do it yourself, or you can go back to them and push on them to update their declarations. And then identify those data gaps we talked about and fill them. Compile any necessary documents you need to fill the gaps that are really presented by your FMD. Too many proprietary substances, make sure you have a certificate of compliance for every regulation you care about, right? If there's no signatures, then get something signed that says it's true. Don't have compliance statements or exemptions. You might be able to use that FMD for compliance statements and but not exemptions, right? So you're going to have to review those gaps and then fill them. Now, looking back, when you look to validating the incoming supplier data, some other things to consider. Claimed exemptions. Are they supported by the FMD data or not? We already saw an example of how that can go wrong. Check the math. I've seen many full material declarations where they've listed all the materials, but the numbers don't add up right. The materials don't add up to the mass of the part, the substances don't add up to the mass of the materials, or there are rounding errors that are too big and confound computer systems. So just check the math, check for rounding errors, make sure everything is okay in a declaration, and push it back to the supplier if you need that math corrected. Apply the due diligence to each supplier and part based on the risk analysis you've already done. per your EN IEC 63000. And not only are you doing that, so like one FMD might be reviewed more detailed than another because you have a higher risk with one FMD supplier than another. And then as you're collecting this data, feed back the responsiveness and data quality metrics back into that process, because one supplier that is very trustworthy today may become less trustworthy over time as we find more and more problems with the data we're receiving from them. So this is a feedback loop that goes into our processes and enables us to maintain an EN IEC 63000 conformant process, which means that we can be deemed compliant no matter what. And then when distributing these things to customers, we want to make these reports available online to avoid fielding customer requests. You know, what we don't want is 350 emails a month asking us for our material declaration on a part or two parts. Just put a portal together so they can get it themselves. Provide those reports in multiple formats, because some customers are not going to be able to process XML files. Other customers are going to demand XML files because they have a platform that's automated, right? And then you want to make sure that you're providing the compliance statements and exemption information and other relevant details. If you don't make them part of the FMD, then make those legal certificates of compliance available with the FMD so that they don't go to your portal to get the FMD, and then after they do their analysis of the FMD, come back and harass you for the certificates anyway, right? The whole point here is to reduce the workload.
Learn more by viewing the full-length video online at greensofttech.com/videos. Plus, learn about our environmental regulation solutions online at greensofttech.com.